Hey y'all, welcome back to my thoughts, questions, breakdown, pseudo reaction to the fourth episode of campaign 4 of Critical Role, the end of the overture, Stone-Faced. Hopefully this mic setup is a little better. I'm borrowing some equipment from my roommate. Um, Still my room is not set up the most conducively to set up both my camera and mic, so I'm hoping this sounds better, and thank you for the person who confirmed my questioning about whether I needed to tweak the sound setup a little bit. So please do let me know if this is much better. Um, so yeah, we'll jump in to the episode. Again, this isn't really a recap, it's more going through the episode in order and little thoughts, moments that caught my ear or attention, some things that may have reminded me of other campaigns I know these people are involved with that may, in knowing that, add a bit of dimensionality to what's in this episode. I say that because I know in the past I brought in Worlds Beyond Number, and there's actually a different campaign that triggered a couple of times for me in this episode. So I am excited to get into the end of the overture, the Halloween episode, the Oops All Alex / Oops No Alex episode, Faced. So we start with the cold open, which is Bolaire's scene in the tavern. We later get confirmation in the episode is called Speak No Evil, meaning that the little password that he gives to get down into it, the when he just tells the guard no evil and goes down, is very Minds of Moria, speak friend and enter. In terms of they hid the password in very plain sight, but always a little fun. We've gotten some Lord of the Rings-esque moments and nods in this episode, so it's fun that we get a little one there. Um, First thing that caught my attention here on a rewatch is again we have the otherworldly scent of this incense pointed out, making this now 2 + 1 in hindsight. So last time with Teor in the Couturier, he smelled the incense there, and it reminded him of the scene we saw in the cold open from episode 2 with the Cormorant Sorcerer's 9-pointed summoning star. So again, I'm still wondering, given that we later learned that this is a hotbed of fiendish activity, and the Markanaud twins also had fiendish associations, but then the first time we saw this, it seemed a little more draconic, unless I've missed my guess, and that was Cormorant Sorcerer using fiendish magic to summon said dragon? So a little uncertain of just how specific this incense is, or if that incense just means big magic. Um, I did note that the barkeep was devil in, and that he had a hat tipped forward to hide the top of his forehead, and that his eyes reflected more candles and lights than were in the room. And we did learn last episode that soulless eyes do not reflect the light of this world. And so this might be a continuation of that, where they're actually reflecting the lights of a different world, or this is something different than soulless. This might be soulless don't reflect any light, fiends reflect different light, possibly. And that's just me guessing based on what they mentioned with the eyes, and I'm guessing the hat tip low to hide the forehead might be hiding something like the start of horns. Um, we do get reference in the overheard conversation between, again, I assume another fiendish individual, or at least fiend affiliated individual, and then the grieving mother and daughter. She referenced the clerics of the totality. So I'm assuming this is sort of the name for the group of clerics that, in the absence of the gods, are just trying to connect to universal truths. So rather than the clerics of the light, the sort of Halavar scheme going on, the actual people that when Brennan referenced the very stressed clerics telling a bunch of very worried people, we're working on it, when it comes to the afterlife, I assume these are those clerics, in that they are genuinely struggling and grappling with these existential questions and trying to find answers for people rather than just trying to scam them and keep in power like the Halavars. Um, as a note, specifically, the Fiend says they can offer a brighter resting place for the individual's soul. I don't know if we're talking bright as in the bright light of hellfire, or if they actually can. I'm suspicious of it being a trick. Um, or was this not a fiendish individual? Brennan does say later it's a hotbed of fiendish magic. But brighter made me think of all the light associated with the Fey magic we see later. Though I doubt, based on the situation with Fairy, I doubt a Fey would actually be able to affect the afterlife for a given soul at this moment with the doors to Fairy closed. So I'm going to, my personal feelings on this is fiendish contract trickery. Good Lord, I hope those women read the terms and conditions, but I don't think they're in a state to. Um, we re-encounter the Mercanod twins, see one of them like sucking or drinking something out of the ear of one of their victims. So wondering, is that affecting his soul or just pulling out specific memories? It's a little unclear as to what state that individual would be in when they were done. But clearly seeing that, I mean, obviously we knew these guys were up to no good, but they don't just wait for the Halivars to send people their way. Though it does seem like they go about it differently when it's on their own time versus on the Halivar's coin. Um, and then we get the encounter with Bolaire, which we get the context for later in the episode. And again, I wait to put these out until after the episode re-airs on Monday. So full spoilers here. We have our first tease that later gets explained as Bolaire is the mask, not body, with the swap over to the new body, which again, rewatching this episode, because I watch it once for myself and then again taking notes. So yeah, it is very interesting to rewatch that opening scene in the context, and then just catching all the vagaries of there's a dead body in the room. Oh, yeah, Brennan and Taliesin, we're catching up on your code now. Um, it does seem like Bolaire specifically set up this situation, in that he brought the empty package to upset the individual he was going to meet. Um, so whether he was going to, if the guy attacked, fight back, overpower him, and place the mask on, dropping his old body, or if he expected to lose this fight and in that win the fight, would be an interesting to see how Taliesin may handle that further, as it does seem like the mask is unable to keep the bodies from decaying, which may mean he needs to regularly replace them. And they did mention this individual was a very similar body type to Bolaire when first introduced, so does the mask have a type? If only because he wants his clothes to fit the new body? Um, and the one thing it did make me think about is the scene in episode 2, Talisin's moment of going into the black box and being told that the deterioration is much more rapid. I think this was the mask checking in on the physical state of its current body and being told, yeah, this one's rotting fast, you need a new one. And whether that was actually affected by any of the magic going on with the halfling coffin that they were investigating at the time. Because again, Taliesin had that like stomach churning reaction to it before they even brought it to the museum. It would be very interesting to see how it all interacts and whether because now with the new revelations, I'm a little more uncertain of my previous theory that Belair is an undead warlock. Given that, one of my major point outs was him seeming to know so much about death and the afterlife and the celestial entities, and then not breathing and calling that out. But being a sentient magical object made to kill a god in a sort of anti-holy war would also explain all of those as well, and he seems pretty welcome in this fiendish group. Um, so I could see undead, I could see fiendish. I've heard a lot of people throwing Hexblade around just because of the changing weapon, but again, with Pact of the Blade in 2024, you don't have to be a Hexblade to be Pact of the Blade. I do think he is Pact of the Blade, I just don't know what patron class he would be. We haven't seen him cast enough spells to see if we are dealing with anything off of any particular spell list. And as we see with some NPCs later, We're seeing some very interesting spells given what we are told these individuals are. And again, and we'll get there with the particular NPC, but NPCs don't necessarily have to follow player character rules. Though Brennan was certainly keeping within combat rules. And again, as we all know, they've got Chris and Jeremy working there, so homebrew is they've got resources they can tap. So we've only got technically one confirmed subclass so far, though we have some very strong. I guess we have one confirmed in the cooldown as well, but we all kind of knew it was dropped in episode 1. Octus is a necromancer. They did specifically say in the cooldown that was what Alex was playing, so we can assume necromancer wizard, and of course we now know Maria's diviner wizard. And we have a couple more that based on actions they've used, I'm pretty certain what subclass they are. And speaking of combat subclasses and actions, we get to our first of only about, depending on how you count them, 5 scenes in this episode, the 3-hour combat. And yeah, I wasn't sure how much I would have to talk about this episode before I rewatched it, going 3 hours of this is combat. Maybe this is going to be my shortest video. And then I started taking notes, and I have I have an extra page of notes than I did last week with my 40 some odd minute video. So we'll see. Um, well, the first thing I wrote down was the quote, "Let's get that one out of the way," with Ashley's reaction to her initiative. In hindsight, if only, my dear, if only. Um, and similarly, when Alex is handed his mini and goes, "I get to enjoy this mini for such a short time." Yeah, yeah, don't worry, you get it back. It's just a little different, but I will admit, I was watching live until the break. That's about as late as I can stay up any given Thursday, and that's if I don't have work the next day. So yeah, when I went to bed, that whole like, should I make myself a pin cushion, like crochet plushie, I was really starting to worry if like, maybe I missed my window. Obviously, we now know that's not the case, but yeah, that was interesting until I could finish the episode the next day. We return right to the garden, where again we are mentioned the courtyard is brimming with undead, like just behind the veil. And in sort of answer to my question from last time about like, are the dead just always that close to the land of the living, or in this particular area, or did the Daconuses bring this many dead with them? It does sound like the world of the dead does press pretty close to the world of the living, but specifically, this amount of undead is because of the Taconis invasion. They brought more close, and then they broke the barrier to sort of overwhelm House Divinos. Um, and as a sidebar that's less lore, more DM style, um, I've seen a lot of other DMs do this, but I just remember noticing it with Brennan in this combat specifically. He is very good at finding ways of narrating missed attacks or failed saves in a way, in dramatic moments, where it doesn't make it a comedy and it doesn't make the character sound incompetent. So the very first thing, Julian missing his first strike on Divinos, and Brennan's narration of that is, you missed because to hit, you would have had to step on your father, and you couldn't do it yet. That's something I really like to take into my DMing is, if the moment feels comedic, and you'll see a lot of the players, if the moment feels comedic, will go ahead and give the comedic reason why they failed. But in the dramatic moment of just saying like, no, you didn't fail because you're not good at this. You are good at this, but there were specific circumstances that prevented you from being able to carry through, either physically or mentally. And in fact, I've seen other DMs actually ask the players for that. Luis, when he DMs in a campaign I'll be talking about a little bit later, I distinctly remember in about the second episode, Christian Navarro, was a guest in campaign 3 of Critical Role, was one of Luis's players, and had a paladin miss most of his attacks in the first combat. Luis asked him why, and Christian had an answer ready in a moment. So it's a fun little DM thing that I noticed. Um, I find it interesting. Primus Draconis specifically tells Julian that he bears his house no ill will. So, despite this being planned and carried out as an utter massacre, whatever motivations are behind this isn't personal vindictive, it's political slash personal goal. Like, this was a check mark on a to do list in order to accomplish something. And specifically, I don't think it was just we're killing all of you to get to Octus, because that's a very inefficient way of going about this. This was two birds, one stone. This is we are dropping the houses of the Venus and Royce, presumably to stop them. We know House Royce is the voice of moderation on the Council of the Chamber of the Lords Advisory. And based on Aranas' conversation with Octus, House Royce is one of the Sundered Houses most familiar with extraplanar activities and most in the know about what's going on in the land of the dead. So if the Draconis are building up an army of the dead, it does make sense that once they're ready to start making their moves, if they want to hide it a little bit longer, or at least hide the specifics a little bit longer, they have to take out the Royces, because the Royces are going to be the first people to be able to understand what is happening. And with the Divinos being the close supporters in Vassal House, the two of them being in the same place, honestly, kind of a three birds, one stone. Octus, Divinos, Royce. And I do want to get into, before we get into the heart of the first round where we lost Octus for a time, though yes and no, because it still took a while after his character death for him to be asked to leave the table, as we later see he has things to do even during death. But I have seen some discussion about how scripted and how pre-planned this moment was. Some people saying it took them out of the action. And I know there can also be the tendency of going, is it unfair to set up a scenario where the characters have to lose? So for those who didn't see the cooldown, I do want to bring in what Brennan and Alex discussed there, to sort of shed light on what this was. As some of you might have been able to pick up from the end of the episode, Alex's character concept for Octus was a undead revenant necromancer, specifically one who had been killed by his family for reasons he didn't even understand at the time. And Brennan asked him, can we play that out? Like, can we have that pivotal moment happen on screen? Alex said yes. However, Brennan was also very upfront about this is still a game. This is not a pre-scripted moment. Meaning there is a chance your character can escape this death. And Alex confirmed he was still going to have Octus try. Even though he knew what his plan was for his character, Octus wasn't going to sit back and escape. They talked about if Octus's initiative had been higher than the ghouls, he had spider climb and was going out that window. If he'd been able to get down into the garden, there's a possibility there. They also talked about how him coming back after he died and based on certain choices he made later was actually not guaranteed. He may have actually had to come up with a new character, and Alex reveals at break he kind of thought he did, because after he was asked to leave the table, he's like, oh, did I mess it up to the point where Octus can't come back now? Oh, maybe I should come up with a new character. And then got told by Brennan, basically, there is one way Octus can come back at this point. It happens to be the way that actually played out because Marisha had the D20 portent roll. But just to clarify, based on what was said in the cooldown, this was not pre-scripted, and this was designed to be difficult. But once the situation was created, Brennan was neither cheating nor pulling punches. That's why he rolled so much in front of the board. Once the situation started, it's all rules as written. The odds are stacked against them, but the dice tell the story. Maybe they win. Maybe they get away. It could have even been a total party kill. But at that point, it came down to actually playing the game, not pre-deciding and scripting. So while the encounter was not quote-unquote balanced, as he did call out, it wasn't unfairly executed. Um, so I just kind of want to throw that disclaimer on there as I've seen some discussion. Um, which kind of takes me to Brennan's warning that he get, which I see as him both preparing the others for the possibility. I don't know how many of the others knew what Alex's character concept was. And so I don't know how many of them knew there was a way for Octus to come back. Or how many of them thought this was life, death, and backup character stakes. Um, but again, he does fairly execute on planned unfairness. And to somebody saying, like, oh, once I found out it was scripted and the others weren't in danger, I checked out. The others were very much in danger. They happened to pull through thanks to good roles and fantastic NPCs, but if they couldn't make it out, they could not make it out, and we could have had multiple character deaths in this. I don't think Brennan is pulling punches in that way, but nor is he pre-scripting failure. It's a very fine line to walk. Um, and so as we get to the murder of Octus, um, I just because I pointed out like Alex's voice acting and like being very specific about when he swapped in and out of Octus's voice and disguised self. I also just for those who have seen Alex play tabletop games before, it comes as no surprise just how much of a physical actor he is. In any of the New York or LA by Night, Vampire the Masquerade streams, Project Ghostlight, that he is the storyteller for, any of the times you've seen him on Critical Role before, but just the intentionality behind things. As soon as he hears silence is dropped, that is the first time he vocalizes as Octus. Um, and I appreciate like, I think a lot of the others are really good role players. Like everybody here is a fantastic role player, obviously in their career, but just the way Alex brings like his role playing to me feels a lot more like acting than some role playing. And I guess as somebody with a theater background, I appreciate this and I find it enjoyable to watch. I think he's uh probably one of my favorite of the new players, but I honestly love them all at this point, so I don't like picking favorites. Um, I just have a sidebar in parentheses of the moment we hit the Abria facial expression from the thumbnail. Yeah, me too, girl. Me too. That when I saw that was the thumbnail, I got very, very afraid. Um, also, I love the spin Abria puts on now that druids can talk in wild shape. But it's not that that Taisha's animal form is speaking, but that her voice comes from the world around her. I love that flavor choice. Um, there were some very interesting lines from Primus talking about the right before he casts Circle of Death. The work that is to come requires focus and no distractions, which does make me wonder is that the work they would have done if everything with Octus had gone according to their plan, or the work that they will do, and that's why they needed the Venus and Royce out of the way? Like, were they clearing the house for something they intended to do that night, or are they taking down these houses for plans that are about to domino out? I could see it either way, and it'd be very interesting to see how it plays out. And speaking of cool lines, there is the one that made me absolutely cringe and sick to my stomach. There is no use in having something if it is not loyal when speaking about his own son. Just, yeah, I think we've got contender for worst dad in the campaign so far. Cause yeah, that is stomach churning. Um, yeah, I have a note that Aranessa was the MVP of this fight from her first roll being a nat 20, which on an athletics check for, and Brennan confirms in the cooldown, or at least calls her a sorcerer in the cooldown, so a nat 20 on an athletics check is definitely impressive for a sorcerer. And he specifically called that in the cooldown as Ethrin's giant mistake being to get that final dig in at Octus, dropping silence. with a sorcerer still conscious in the room, and that being what fucked them up, because Aranessa could then cast spells. Um, and I'll get into that more as we see the spells Aranessa actually casts. I find it interesting Brennan referred to her as a sorcerer. Um, if she is a sorcerer, I believe she almost has to be a homebrew class based on the spells we've seen her cast. Or homebrew subclass, sorry. Uh, when Primus was attacked by Valus's guiding bolt, they mentioned there was a real danger to Primus of severing some sort of potent magical energy. And my first thought there's the sort of project self astral projection wave, like if your cord, like your soul is projected out of your body, and there's a cord of energy tethering you back to it, that if that breaks, you can't go back to your body. But we do know Primus at least had enough of a physical form there that Julian's weapons, Brennan didn't talk about them being any kind of weaker against Primus, and he didn't stick around after taking, he didn't tank a ton of damage before he moved to get out, and Brennan called it out as fleeing. So I'm not certain if it was some sort of projection or some sort of plane walking. We do know he plane shifts into the sort of near spirit realm of the dead adjacent to the waking world. Um, or if he was sort of drawing on the magic of death to protect him or bolster him. I'd be very curious the more we find out about Primus, what sort of exploitable weaknesses there are, and specifically that he is, for all intents and purposes, a mortal human, weak to radiant damage, like the undead he commands. And unfortunately, we didn't see anyone hit Ethryn with radiant damage, so we don't know if the same would be true of Ethryn, and if that's just a Takona's feature, or if some sort of spell or effect was in place that rendered him vulnerable to radiant damage. Which, now that I say this, and Shadow Sorcerer is not a subclass I have played often, but I believe one of their capstone abilities is a form where they become like resistant to most like physical and necrotic damage, but they are vulnerable to radiant damage in that form. If someone more familiar with the Shadow Sorcerer wants to chime in, it literally just occurred to me as I'm talking about it, this may be the higher level Shadow Sorcerer ability. Um, Shadow Sorcerer is never really my go-to, so it's not one I've looked at super closely. But knowing that we know that's what the Takona's family sort of is, that would make sense now that I think about it. Um, we get confirmation that all of the NPCs introduced at the last episode is sort of the like courtiers that are involved with Julian. I thought we got names, personalities, and descriptions to set up a betrayal because it seemed like we had a rat in the Royce family. No, we set them up to twist the knife for Julian to lose everyone, which, to be fair, just from those scenes, it helps us understand more how big Julian's reaction is, because if all we saw was his father die and a bunch of nameless people in the background, it would feel somewhat justifiable, maybe too big, but knowing like these were the people that were expecting him to come up to bed with them and they're gone too, like no, that helps drive it home that everybody else we didn't get names for, yeah, he knew them, whether he was close with them or not, he knew them. This was everybody close to him except for Aranessa, gone in less than 20 seconds. So, yeah, Julian's crash outs, while from a broader perspective, understanding everything, at the end of the episode might be a little less. You might say, oh, that's an exaggeration, but like from his perspective, we know exactly why he's reacting the way that he is. Um, Yeah. We have Primus asking Ethrend, do you have it? And specifically, and this is where I found it interesting that they replaced Octus's heart with the Stone of Night Song and left the Stone of Night Song there. I thought it would be a replacement and then bring the body with them, sort of get their animated Reaper, Ferryman sort of entity. I found it very interesting that it was specifically Octus's heart that they were after. Um, and given that Octus sort of would have that split perspective later of seeing a different face looking down on him from a different table, I sort of wonder if his family had built, for want of a better term, a Frankenstein Octus. If they had built a different body and were just going to put the heart of one of theirs in it, and maybe use some sort of connection with the Stone of Night song to sort of get maybe two of them going. I can see a reason of them leaving the body behind is because they were going to wipe that entire house and didn't expect it to get removed. Um, and then with everything that happened in the realm of the dead, kind of distracting them from that. Um, but yeah, I'm a bit interested in what they would have been planning to do. If it was the Frankenstein Octus, I can see that having been one of the ways that potentially Alex could have come back. But given that he pulled the Stone of Night song out of his spirit form, maybe that's what stopped that from being a way he could come back. And so that the only way he could come back was how we see at the end of the episode, given that his sort of entity unravels. But we'll get there. Um, I find it interesting the little dig Primus gives Julian of, like, well done, warrior. I look forward to seeing you on the other side. With the revelation that they are building up an army of dead individuals, I think that was a bit of a noted for recruitment line, essentially. Um, but then we get to the shades, kind of pulling through. And we have Valus's perspective on these being spirits of the restless dead. Like, even before the gods died, there were those that tried to cling to life so hard that they traded away every part of themselves, their memories, even eventually the memory of the reason why they wanted to come back. Um, and I don't know how many people watching Campaign 4 currently or have watched Luis's first streamed actual play on YouTube, uh, Tales of Alma. Tales Unrolled is the YouTube channel. Alma is the setting of their first campaign. Season 1 has already wrapped up. Christian Navarro, Frida, from Campaign 3, is one of the players. For those who watched Project Ghostlight, Mayana Barrett is another player. And for Dimension 20 fans, Oscar, I'm going to forget his. I feel so bad. I'm terrible with last names. But for those who watched A Court of Fey and Flowers, the individual who played Root is one of the 4 players Luis has. It's a very good campaign, and memory and the trading away of memories for power becomes a very important plot point the closer it gets to the climax. I'm going to be very vague, as I assume a lot of people have not seen that yet. Strongly recommend it, and especially given some lines we get about Azune later, I don't know how much of that may have influenced the Shades world building from Brennan, but I think this is an idea that Luis has been playing with for a while. Again, he DMs the Alma campaign, given how we get a glimpse into Azune's mind space when it comes to memory and letting go and holding on and what it is to forget, to remember, to honor, to let die a second time. So be very interested to see where these themes play out going forward. Also, as a sidebar, for our 2 multi-class characters, Azune and Julian, we get confirmation on at least one of them what the level split is right now. We, based on this combat, Julian is a Fighter 2, Rogue 1, because he has Action Surge, not Cunning Action. Because he action surged on his first turn, and then when he wanted to disengage, he had to spend his action to do so. So he doesn't have the second level of Rogue yet to unlock Cunning Action, but he does have the second level of Fighter for Second Wind for Action Surge. So we are most likely going to see a Fighter subclass before we see a Rogue subclass, unless he goes Rogue for the next 2 levels, which, given the House Davino situation at the end of the episode, maybe he does. We'll talk a little bit more about tables and potential paths for characters after this when we get to the end of the episode. Um, we have the interesting thing of Valus being an absolute badass, fighting all of the shades and every attack dealing only half damage and not draining her ability score like we see it later with Julian. Um, it'd be very interesting to know if this is a trait of elves, specifically in Ahriman, given that elves are supposed to be immortal here. Um, obviously that's not uh D&D rules as written. Elves are not a species to inherently get any damage resistances. That is an Aasimar trait. So it'd be very interesting to find out. Because I have heard somebody say that Valus was the daughter of Salandri. To my knowledge, we've not had anything confirmed of any like biological relationship, but I did note that Vela seemed very interested in the mother-daughter relationship between Shadia and Taisha that one moment they had together. But whether that is just how she viewed Salandri or whether there actually was a biological relationship there, or if it is a feature of a paladin subclass, though we believe she is Oath of Vengeance based on her having Hunter's Mark in her kit. Um, so it'd be a bit interesting to know where the homebrew is right now. Um, I'm gonna come back to all of the different roles they had Octus do when he was dead. I sort of took notes on all of them in one section on my paper. So I'll kind of run through until we get to the last one, and I'll circle back to all of them. Uh, there's the line to Taisha about there's a place where all things are remembered, but we're going to scrub your path from the face of the beyond, which, given that it is that the druidical path is sort of the only other way for the afterlife cycle to even be reached at all at this point, even if that's more of a cycle of rebirth than an actual afterlife, it makes sense that Taconuses would want that stopped as well as the gods gone, and that way they have control over all of the dead. Um, we do have confirmation that though the doors of fairies are still closed, not only does Arnessa have her innate magic from the spells we see her cast, even the fairies of the dead answer her call when she said, please, please, please. Like, she wasn't casting a spell because she was holding haste at that moment. She couldn't have cast another leveled spell. So those fairies that started attacking the dead that hadn't come through yet and driving them off, that wasn't her summoning anything or casting a spell. That is the realm of fairy reacting to Aranessa. Um, and kind of on the sidebar, when the haste does land, Brennan specifically calls it out. The doors may be closed to you, but its gifts are still promised. Um, and kind of getting into where I said if Aranessa is a sorcerer in a literal sense, like a D&D mechanical sense, she is a homebrew subclass at this point. I triple checked. Um, the 3 spells in particular, now one of which being a cantrip, she could have gotten, I believe, Magic Initiate Cleric or Magic Initiate Druid, I believe could have gotten her Druidcraft and Healing Word. But Tree Stride is a 5th level spell that is only, I believe, Druid and Ranger. Currently, there's not a sorcerer subclass with access to it. And it would make sense. This has bothered me for a while. There really isn't a Fey descendant subclass for sorcerer. I have wanted to play that. The closest you have is wild magic, and that doesn't fit for every concept. Aranessa would not be a wild magic sorcerer, just how she behaves and how she fought in this fight. Um, so if this is a homebrew subclass, I hope it is released eventually, because if I ever want to play somebody with a Fey lineage sorcery, this feels a little bit more in line with what I would be thinking personally. Um, okay. I'm just checking my notes. So going back here to specifically the roles Octus was asked to make after his death, and this is a couple of turns in succession. The first one is the con save. At 22, we can assume this one was a success. And the visible result we see is that Valus and Taisha both hear a nightingale. And we have no real sense of what this may have been. I personally, if I'm looking at how everything played together, think this is him starting to constitute enough that when Taisha gets that nat 1 death save and starts seeing him there, that there's enough of him left to speak to. We have the wisdom save with guidance. It is an 11. We are later told this is a failure and that he has forever lost his chance to walk the paths through the forest. So I think this is the moment where he got cut off from being able to proceed to an afterlife, and his only choices were somehow return or go, like, let his spirit be pulled where his family is pulling it. Then we have the first Arcana roll, Arcana 18. And that's the first moment where he sees that other face looking down at him, talking about it. I think that's where his spirit was being drawn by his family, like with the holding of the heart and trying to compel him there. I think they were trying to get his spirit to animate something they had pieced together. For purposes I'm not certain as of yet. And we have his second Arcana check, the Arcana roll of 19, which was just one shy of whatever knowledge he could have unlocked. But he does sort of, in that, as he's sewing himself back up together, sort of have these three sensations of the thing stirring in him, the thing still in him, and hidden. And then the medicine check, 15, he can deal with one of those. And he chooses to pull out the Stone of Night Song and unravel his soul. I am still personally piecing together what the full implications of that are, obviously some of which we have not seen yet, but based on the cooldown, I believe that is the point where now the only way for him to come back was that nat 20 on removing the Stone of Night Song from his physical body. Why? I'm a little less certain. It does seem like part of his soul may have gotten wrapped up in the Stone of Night Song, so removing the like spiritual echo of that kind of unmade him. I do believe, based on the reaction of that face screaming "No, no, no" when he did it, that he that doing that did in fact disrupt whatever the Conuses were trying to do. But I think in disrupting that made it much harder for there to be a chance for him to come back. I think possibly obviously we have no way of knowing what the stirring thing was inside of him. Maybe it was a nightingale, if or what removing Pin would have done. I think if he had left the Stone of Night Song, he would have been a little more bound to what his family wanted and maybe woken up in that body and had to reconnect with the party. But that's just me piecing together. And obviously we don't know, and it kind of at this point, what would have happened no longer matters. What we have to untangle with is what did happen. And with fate truly being aligned with Murray having that nat 20 in her pocket that Marisha saved and used to bring Octuses back. Wrapping up the last bit of scenes in this battle. Good Lord, I'm glad I'm recording this on a day I'm off. I looked at the timestamp on this recording. I love, again, from the first episode, we learned that Taisha was a druid from a smithing family, and in D&D, metal and druidic magic doesn't always go along, but I love that specifically it is called out that for Lois, like, speak with plants allows them to speak with metal. That it's just this, like, no, metal is not unnatural just because we work it. I love that, and I cannot wait to see this more. Oh, and specifically, Taisha specifically called out using Land's Aid in this battle, which I believe is the Circle of Land Druid ability, which means I believe we have another somewhat confirmed subclass. Unless I'm wrong, Circle of Land is not a druid I play often, but I do believe that is the, because it was burning and use of wild shape, so it had to have been a subclass feature, not a spell. Um, and we don't know yet, but there is something significant about the Divinos demi-gauntlets. Obviously, Julian's been using his as a weapon, but he made sure to take his father's with him when he fled. So whether it is sentimental significance, a sign of honor, or if there's actually something special about these gauntlets, we do know Julian now has two, and it would be very interesting to see how Matt plans to use that going forward. All right, so that's the first scene done. I have much fewer notes for most of the rest from here on out. We come back from the break to house. We've got the little bit with Shadia talking about the paintings. I find it interesting, like, even though Murray was like trying to like push that conversation aside, Brennan still made a point of dropping two names, like specifically name dropping two legends, Bolan de Vastre and Lugzub Kettlehelm. Um, Time will only tell if this is a Brennanism like filling out the world a bit more, or if these legends or stories we'll find out a bit more about later. I just wanted to note those down because it seemed that Brennan made a point of getting them out before having the NPC depart the scene. Um, and then the humorous exchange of, "Thought you were a bursar. Have you ever met a trustworthy financial advisor? I run a theater." I just love how much Liam's character has already allowed them to get in all sorts of like theater producer, theater behind the scenes jokes. I have a feeling this is going to be very cathartic for them for as long as Hal is around. Um, again, we get the confirmation of Murray as a diviner wizard, the first in episode stated subclass. And also, I love this take on explaining portents and foretelling as very much drawn more from science than superstition. As someone whose last wizard was a gravity wizard in a Spelljammer case campaign, the idea of magic and physics being um, very intertwined, and especially on a wizard, a academic, studyable, testable, theorize, hypothesize, experiment, revise sort of approach. I do love that. And then obviously when we get to the scene where the portents are actually used later, we get some very cool flavor and in-universe explanation for how portents are. Because the interesting thing with portents being like you get these dice rolls, but until you use them, it doesn't really feel like you've foreseen an event. You just can make something go a certain way, which feels less like foretelling, more just like putting your thumb on the scale of fate. So I do like how they sort of played with that of like it's kind of a resonance, and then you reach that moment that it resonates with, and it's not that you foresaw this coming, but that this was like the way things had to be. I love that. Then we get to the scene of the Falcon's Rest before Azune reunites with the rest of the party. And this is kind of where I wanted to return back to that theme of remembering, forgetting, healing, letting go. As we learn a little bit more about Azune personally, that he keeps this litany of the dead, some of the names being written on Falcon's Rest, some of them are just the ones he remembers that never got put there. Um, we get called out that he goes to Falcon's Rest every day that he can, that he is unable to tell the difference between letting go and forgetting, and that if he has to stay in pain to keep the memory and honor alive, that he will. And again, with memory being such an important theme in Tales Unrolled and their Alma campaign, I'd be very interested to see how Luis takes it this time, given that this is a theme he has very clearly been wanting to explore and wrestle with. And tabletop games are a phenomenal way to explore these larger concepts that we are wrestling with. And again, he's almost the exact opposite of the Shades that released the memories for the power, and instead he's almost being willing to weaken himself to keep these memories. And his memory is compared to a dragon's golden hoard, which could just be metaphor and fantastical comparison. But again, I'm still on my Cormorant is the draconic sorcerer house conspiracy theory. And my Azune is a bastard of one of the Sundered Houses theory based on the fact that he has sorcerer levels. So I am holding this as a hint that he is a bastard or like sequestered member of House Cormorant, or at least descendant of draconic sorcerer. But again, only time's gonna tell on that one. I just will grab onto whatever confirmation I can to keep my little conspiracy board going. Um, then we jump to Bolaire and the Arcanaut and the rest of the party making their way there. We specifically that Bolaire is reestablishing control as things are moving faster than I would like. And I'm not certain if that means things on the city. He talks about like later when he's telling the party what he felt about something moving on the face of the world, whether that's advancing faster than Bolaire would like, or whether he is going through bodies faster than he would like. Could be either. He did, again, if the scene where he went into the black box and found the deterioration was more rapid than expected, it could be the latter of you're going through more bodies. And the two may even be connected. Whatever's going on in the world, if it's affecting life, death, undeath, might be affecting the mask's ability to keep a body going. Um, we do have a line about Bolaire wanting out of his deal with the Aussie before, quote, doing anything. And it's not exactly clear what it is he wants to do or why he wants to be out of the deal first. He knows the Aussie is dead, but he wants to check in with Thimble. So I'm a little not confused, but definitely curious to see why Bolaire was so desperate to talk to Thimble to confirm where the deal stood, given that he seemed to make the choice very quickly to lay all his cards on the table. So I don't think what he was afraid of consequence-wise was her telling them. And I don't think he's a bad enough judge of character to believe that she would tell others in authority, given her own relation to authority. So I'm not sure what he was afraid of her doing that would and what that would prevent him from doing in return. Um I did notice on a rewatch that right before Bolaire gets Murray's message asking him to come open the door, the it's bastard season. That was a fun moment of prick season, bastard season, prick season, bastard season. That he hears voices off in the museum, which, given what we see later, I believe is the benefactor Temide and the lady from House Cormorant. Um, Belair drops a line about being frustrated with where she, Thimble, left me, left all of us. So again, I'm very curious as to what else in this agreement he has not told us about would have affected all of them. Especially again, if he was already planning or very quickly decided who lay the cards on the table and tell the truth. I don't think we've gotten the full story from Bolaire. I'm very curious about what the shape of what we don't have yet is. Um, when we finally get a little bit hint and the things that Liam is able or Hal is able to notice is different about Belair before the big reveal. Um, Taliesin mentions the skin is no longer gray. And that makes me wonder, was it like gray decaying skin before? Or we know his body was an elf before. Was he also a dark elf like Valus? Which was not something I had considered, honestly, just based on the coloration of the artwork and the fact that it had red hair. I didn't clock drow dark elf aesthetic from that, but maybe I could be wrong. Or it could have just been like graying, drying out, decaying skin. Um, sometimes you cling too much onto one word and it ends up being not that important. Um, so we have the 30-foot hand of stone that was this giant's hand. Be interesting to know if it was turned to stone or if it was always stone. I don't think we're dealing with D&D giants, as we talked about. This is a creature whose head would have touched the bottoms of clouds based on scale. And I did note the inscription of the tattoos being, "Where we have stood since the dawn of time, no one else will shape against." And I'm beginning to wonder if the Shapers took that title after they defeated the Giants, as we are told they did, to sort of spite them and almost like spit on the memory of like, oh, we couldn't shape against you. Guess what we just did. Um, we get the reveal of the masks and that it is a family of masks. Baudelaire calls himself a one part of the pantomime. And as someone with a bit of a theater background, who's had an interest in but has never gotten to fully delve into the various types of theater related to mask work, something that interests me about this based on what I know about mask work is that very rarely in a theater where all the characters are masked are the masks identical. Because when you can't see the actor's face, like pantomime, it's um, exaggerated movement style and exaggerated facial depictions on the mask and costume that tell you who this character is. There were these stock characters um, and stock situations that could be rotated in and out and sort of pieces assembled pretty quickly. Commedia dell'arte is another theater style very similar to that. And the masks were more and more exaggerated. This mask has seemed rather neutral, but he did specifically call out in the description the black lines like tear tracks down the face. And I'm beginning to wonder if that is the sign of whatever character Baudelaire was when the mask was made. It would be very interesting if we ever get an intact mask to see what the different expressions are, to know a bit more about what these characters, what this play sort of was. And again, that could just be my theater brain going, ooh. Um, we get a little bit more about how the different species killed their gods. That it was human spellcasters with staves that killed Tanzul, and a single arrow from presumably an elven archer that killed Salandri, which does make something interesting about the line about in the last episode about the Loys finding a secret under the earth that could help kill the gods. We wondered, was it a special metal they found? But given, and also given that the masks are called out as being bone or clay or porcelain, I think all the different weapons are made of different material. You could make a metal staff, but it's much more likely to be a wooden staff, and usually the only metal on an arrow is the arrowhead. So I think they found a forging technique or some sort of way that you have to go about making a thing to make it able to kill the gods. Again, we were told the pariah blade was cold iron, had never felt the touch of heat, it was just hammered out. And I wonder if this, like keeping it back from heat, keeping it back from magic, that made it this sort of anti-magical weapon. Which now that I say out loud makes me wonder about those spellcasters that killed Tansul. Um, but yeah, definitely interested to learn a little bit more. We did get confirmation it wasn't a single pariah blade the Loys made, but that there were multiple, so we don't know that the Liar's blade is one of the pariah blades, but if there's more than one, there is a chance, and that may have actually be what Cormorant was looking for when she came and said, like, we wanted to do an inventory of the pariah blades. If the Sundered Houses suddenly put together that the Sword of Thiazi Fang, the light, was maybe supposed to have been in the museum. Maybe that's one of the artifacts that he made Baudelaire give him by holding this over his head. Um, uh, so that's sort of my current theory about why Cormorant was there. Before we get on to Cormorant, the other thing is Azune seemed very fixated on, are you a machine? Are you a part? The mending cantrip. Like, clearly intending to show, like, I don't care if you are, I still see you as a person, but I want to show you this. Like, I don't care if you're a machine. So this is my only point against my he's a draconic sorcerer conspiracy. I could also see him being a clockwork soul. Um, where there's something about living machinery and then maybe the idea of memory of objects remembering because we get the candle reconstituting itself. So could be interesting. I could see either way. Those are my two current theories as to when he gets his spellcasting subclass for his sorcerer. Because again, as a multiclass, he doesn't have a subclass yet. Whether he is intended to go draconic or clockwork soul would be my two um, thoughts at the moment. Um, and then we get the scene with Cormorant again wanting to do an inventory, like check on the pariah blades. So I'm going, she was looking for the liar's blade. Only other thing I noted there was the failed insight check before she sort of wheels off with Temide, and when Bolaire finally gets himself out of that conversation, can't help but feel that Temide is dead. Like, Bolaire missed something, and either the museum is about to come under some sort of attack, or Temide has no idea he's about to die. Um, Lady Cormorant scares me, and Temide was too oblivious for his own good. And with that, we are at scene 4 of the grand finale, 5 hours into this episode. We do check in at the Taconis household, and the Taconises were very thorough in clearing up their mess, like, no bodies left behind. Which, if the Taconises specifically control the spirits of the dead, I do also find it interesting. Well, no, they came with ghouls, so they do have use for bodies as well, so, I have a feeling any dead bodies of people Julian cared about, he may be seeing again in less than friendly circumstances. Um, Again, I love the idea of mending as remember, asking the object to remember itself. And for those that saw EXU Calamity, Brennan's first time DMing on Critical Role, it very much reminded me of the chamber that Sarah, Travis's character, used in the first episode to sort of reconstruct the spellcasting chamber of what's his name? Vespin Gloris. We're an hour into the recording, the brain's a little breaking, of, again, playing with this theme of memory and the idea of even objects having memory. We get confirmation the Loys are not a noble house, so it's confirmation to those who have been confused. The Loys are not one of the sundered houses. They are not even a noble house. They have sort of the designation of House Loy as a way of showing how important they are, and we know they are financially well off because, well, when you're the first people to figure out how to kill the gods, you're gonna be important from here on out, and that is influence that can be lent on. It does seem like they try to use it for the best. We do remember that Taisha offered some of that influence to Hal to sort of grease wheels when he was talking about difficulties with the theater. Um, One of Arnessa's sort of rambles is piecing together was that the Taconises have been quiet for so long. So whatever plot they are now kicking off has been in the works for a while, and they have been keeping it on the down low. And now they feel like they don't have to anymore. They're ready to go for it, which is terrifying. Um, and we have the moment of using the portent to remove the Stone of Night song using that nat 20, which is the only way mathematically that could have succeeded. And um, specifically calling out that potent magical mistakes were not only prevented by using that nat 20, but actually mended retroactively, the ripples going back up the river of time. And I wonder if that was mistakes that the Taconises made in going about whatever they did, or mistakes as in Octus's choices in that death of like pulling out the Stone of Night song. While I do believe that did thwart the immediate effect of the Taconises' plan, I believe for the sake of his soul was a mistake and that he couldn't come back, except that this mended that mistake. Um, but I also think there is something very huge going on here because Brennan called this out as one of the most potently magical acts to have taken place in this city, and this is where the pariah blades were forged. So I don't think this was just a try to bring Octus back in the last 5 minutes of the episode. Something else was going on here that we don't fully understand yet. And I think the Seeker's table is going to be chasing down these threads and possibly also whatever Taconis is up to. And the two are very likely closely intertwined. Um, we get our couple starting to hint a little bit more our dwarf lore. What's going on with dwarves in the world of Ahriman, the true calling of the dwarves being when Murray is tracing out sort of like gravity and space time and sort of interesting idea of almost dwarves understanding these more scientific concepts and approaching magic as science, whether that's Murray specifically or what. I am so fascinated to learn what Brennan's view of the dwarves are here, as someone who, my last wizard was culturally a dwarf, mechanically an Earth Genasi. But again, gravity wizard, Earth Genasi dwarf, and then this is the dwarf lore I've gotten so far in Ahriman. I am absolutely loving. And again, there's at least in the narrative, Brennan tied the resurrection to like some of his Octus's blood dripping off the Stone of Night Song and interacting with it. So I'm really curious to see exactly what sort of magical untangling we're going to be going through. Again, I do believe that is going to be the Seeker's Table, specifically taking on figuring out what's going on with the Night Song, the Taconis's Army of the Dead, and all of that. My current theories for that party, we obviously have Octus and Valus with the closest ties to both the Stone of Night Song and coming back from the dead. Um, Taisha has her ties to Octus, and also we got in the cooldown that orcish warrior Octus got the vision of in the Barrow Guard. Um, Liam and Abria talked about their reactions to it in the moment in the cooldown. Their son Aligar, the one that was being trained by Julian, is that orcish warrior in the Barrow Guard. So Taisha, she's got both of her boys to look out for. So I think we're seeing Taisha in that group. I think the schemers. Obviously, we've got the Chamber of the Lord's Advisory is making too many moves in the city to start ignoring. We do have to rally them back. Hal and Murray and Azune do make the most sense to push back against that. Um, Leaving Bolaire and Julian as the question marks. With Julian's want of revenge against the Taconuses, I could see a very strong way of that pushing him to the Seeker's Table. Though obviously we do have the tension with Octus, though that could also be explained as I'm going to keep my eye on you because I don't trust you. I'm not letting you out of my sight. And that would also allow for more time to play out his interactions with Valus, his interactions with Abria. So far, this is those three are the ones Julian has seemed to interact with the most that are still here. Of course, obviously, Thimble off on the soldier's table, which would put Bolaire in the schemer's table, most likely. Though he's a warlock, charisma caster, and the museum definitely allows him a position of influence, and we do see the Sundered Houses are making a move on it. If they really were looking for the Liar's Blade and Bolaire has to cover for what he did, I could see that as being an explanation. However, his connection with the Shaper's War, and looking into at least the Halfling Coffin could be an argument for him being on the Seeker's Table. If he is on the Seeker's Table, I could see Arnessa maybe staying within the city. The house has fallen, so I'm honestly thinking Arnessa and Julian have to get out of the city before the Taconuses realize it was not a clean sweep. But I could also see them maybe making an ally with one of the stronger houses that Taconus wouldn't move against, and sort of doing a, you know, are we going to tell them what you did? Are we not? Are you going to try to move against us? How blatant are you going to be? Can we force you to play your hand? And maybe that gets Julian pushing more into rogue levels, depending on how underhanded he has to be in supporting Arnessa. Or on the Seeker's Table, I can see more fighter levels coming out, depending on if they are going out and fighting undead. Or possibly that could get rogue levels and we could get a Phantom Rogue. But yeah, so right now I feel like both tables have three pretty strong contenders, and then we've got the two floating that I could see going either way, though I have my own reads as to which way they would go. I think Julian would be a Seeker, Bolaire a Schemer. But that could just, again, be me putting the Charisma caster on the Schemer's table, and Taliesin being very comfortable in playing characters adjacent to high society. And obviously with a connection with low society as well, as we see in the opener. But we'll have to wait to find out. Again, we have no episode This coming week, we have the one shot, which is a sidebar. I'm not going to be doing these for the one shots. Some of the sponsored one shots, I don't even have time to watch. I'm going to be honest. And I've got a big trip coming up next month that's going to make it hard for me to even keep up with the regular campaign. Speaking of which, come first week of November, we are going back to the soldiers table, has been confirmed. And they did say when we finish up with the soldiers table, we'll come back to this moment with everybody here and then split off. So it'll be everyone present, and then one of the tables will split off probably for the rest of the episode. So we actually won't get confirmation on the table split. We can't even do the like sneaky thing of like, oh, the episode opens and here's who's sitting here, so this is our table. Nah, they're not gonna give it to us that easily. But yeah, so longest episode yet. So much for the battle episode being the shorter discussion. But yeah, if you've stuck around this long, feel free. I don't want to do the stereotypical like, what do you think the table breakdown is gonna be? But I mean, if you've got an opinion and want to share it, by all means, I'm not going to tell you not to comment. I would say, kind of tying in with the question I asked in the first episode about what sort of character would you create in Aramon, based on what it looks like these plot threads are going to be, chasing down to Sidamir and Casimir, taking back the city from the Sundered Houses by means political, or possibly underhanded, or both, and investigating the Taconis's machinations in the realm of the dead. Which table would you want to play at, and what would be your character concept? For me, I haven't fully let go of my Stars Druid concept. I'm obviously can't play a Goliath based on what we know of the giant lore, so I'm say I've got a Halfling Stars Druid that would be very interested in the Seeker's table because Questions of Fate would be very interesting to explore in a world without gods and in a world where someone just came back from the dead for kind of the first time ever. And conversely, a Sorlock, Sorcerer, Archfey Warlock, connected to House Royce, who is very angry and on the Schemer's table right now. Because, yeah, if you go enough levels into Draconic Sorcerer and Pact of the Blade Warlock, both your AC and your attack rolls key off your charisma, even when you're not wearing armor and not visibly carrying a weapon. So, yeah, talk about the like, oh, I'm coming in to talk first, but the moment it turns into a fight, you're dead. Those would be my two character concepts. As much as I love combat, I don't have an idea yet of who I'd want to play on the soldiers table. If I was creating a character for this campaign. But all the same, we'll be very interested to see how they turn out. And I'd love to hear any of y'all's thoughts. And again, if the sound is better this episode, please do let me know. I'm going to be trying to tweak the setup until I can get it good. All right. Bye, y'all.